We've all heard enough of everyone's best practices in software development, and today we're meeting with Andreas Kling to learn about his worst practice. So, Andreas, tell me more about yourself and what type of software you write.
Sure. I'm Andreas Kling, and I've been programming since early childhood in the late 80s, early 90s. And since then, I've worked at various companies, including Nokia and Apple for many years, where I built web browsers. More recently, in 2018, I started a project called Serenity OS after I went through a drug rehab program. And Serenity OS is a from scratch operating system that looks and feels like a 90s PC, but it's Unix like underneath. So it's kind of the dream system that I always wished existed. And we build everything ourselves in-house, all the way from the kernel to the full web browser that we have. And this was a side project for a while, but today it's my full-time gig, thanks to a whole bunch of sponsors who support me working on the project.
That's awesome. So, tell us, what is your worst practice?
Well, I have a number of terrible practices, but this one is probably the one I'm myself the most disgusted by. So whenever I get a new laptop or other computer, I like to see if I can get Serenity OS to boot and run on it. And when it inevitably fails to boot, usually the screen is all black, or there's like debug output spamming the screen and you can't see what it says. And what I do is, in order to catch what's going on, I like to put like a little piece of code that just writes out the disk to the hard drive, to the root directory, that just dumps out all of the log, so that then I can reboot into Linux, mount the Serenity partition, look what's in the log, try to figure out what the problem is, and see if I can fix the code, and then reboot back into Serenity OS. And I just go around and round like that. And it takes usually several minutes for every test cycle. And it's pretty silly. And what I should be doing is I should hook up a second computer with a serial cable, because then I can just see the serial console booting in real time from the comfort of a Linux terminal. But whenever I'm in this process, I always feel like, well, this next reboot is going to be the one that fixes it, Like, I'm sure I fixed all the bugs. So I just think, I'll just reboot this one more time. And then it doesn't work. And the cycle repeats. And, after I've done this like 15 times or something, wasted a whole evening, something starts working. And then I get so excited, like totally elated. And I forget about my ridiculous behavior. And I think, oh, it was all worth it. And then I just never learn. And I never set up a serial console. And it's still like this to this day.
Do you have this affect you in other parts of the stack?
It's really just this one thing. It's really just booting on bare metal hardware, because I'm typically in a really fast test loop, because I normally develop using a virtual machine. So I can sort of edit, compile, and test in a few seconds if I'm working on something.
Can you imagine if Linus Torvalds had a virtual machine when he was building Linux, like how much easier that might have been in theory?
For sure, yeah. It would have accelerated development substantially, I think, for those guys. And, people, not so much anymore, but like when we were starting out with Serenity OS, a lot of people thought, oh, you're going so fast. Like, how can you make so much progress so fast? And really, it's just because we have better tools. Like, people compare it like, oh, this is where Linux was after 2 years of development, whatever.
Right.
And the tools we have today are just vastly superior, obviously. This is like the one scenario where I have to sit through this bad boot loop times. And that's part of what I tell myself, like, oh, well, it's only when I do this. And it's kind of rarely, as a rationalization.
What do you think would clinch it for you? Is there a tool that's missing, or, how would it be magically solved?
I think I just need to purchase a cable and a serial port card for my other computer and install it, and then I'll just start using it.
Okay, well, maybe we got to get you a care package or something like that. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate hearing about your worst practice.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me.